Welcome to the Relationship Matters podcast, where we explore different aspects of relationships and human connectedness. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with John Britton, a coach, writer, performer, improviser, and a trainer of performers.
For the first 15 years of his career, he was a freelance artist. After completing his MA in theater studies, he worked across a wide range of art forms and with a huge range of groups all over the world. John was the founder and director of the Duende School of Ensemble Physical Theater. He has run a large number of performance training residencies and workshops. He has also written several books. His Self with Others program has been the main theme in his work. Recently, his main focus has been on his one-on-one coaching work. Momentum is a 3-month coaching program to get the client unstuck, refocused, and back on track. At the end of the interview, I will share his contact info if you're interested in working with John or learning more about him and his work.
Hello, John.
Anna, how are you?
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good.
Well, first of all, good evening or good afternoon to you. Good morning.
5 o'clock, late afternoon, just starting to get dark.
How are you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pottering along quite happily. I'm doing a lot of writing and some coaching, a little bit of teaching, a bit of acting and mentoring. So nothing to complain about.
Relationships. I'm so intrigued by this topic because as children we were born with our biologically imprinted ability to connect. So being authentic and connecting to ourselves, it was our natural being. So we didn't have to sit down and do exercises to connect to ourselves. We were connected. We were who we were. And then by the time we are teenagers or young adults, something happens and there's a shift and connection becomes very difficult and painful. We are taught that somehow we are just not exactly good enough the way we are, and we focus on how we are different and separate instead of how we are the same. I would really like to know more about your work at first. Maybe you could talk about your work, and maybe then you could talk about, if we still have time, I would ask you about your journey, because your program, Self and Others, the physical theater, the school that you are the founder of, director. I have a bit of an experience of a workshop, like it was led by your colleague Aliki when I participated in the Contact Dance Festival in Budapest. And for me, it was just such a powerful program. And so tell me a little bit about your work, how you work with people.
A lot of things in there, and I'll try not to go on for too long. But I want to start just by responding to what you said about, we sort of start off naturally able to connect, and then later in, teenage, whatever, we find connection difficult. I would say that slightly differently. I mean, I think the story that you're telling is a good story. I would tell that story slightly differently, which is that humans are interconnected. That is our natural state. We come into the world, I write about this in some of my work, we come into the world by the interconnection of two DNAs, a mother and a father. We are born, the months prior to being born, we are integrally connected to the body of the mother. At birth, we experience separation. We still need connection. A child wouldn't survive 6 hours without connection. As we grow, right from that first moment, we encounter forms of separation. Sometimes it's dysfunctional separation. And attachment theory, John Bowlby, all of those things, we'll talk about this. Sometimes it's a dysfunctional separation. Sometimes it's a very functional and useful separation, but we learn that we are separate. I talk about this just in my own writing, in my own work, about we are naturally, as an animal, we are an interconnected self. The self is an interconnection. Internal connections and external connections. But we are taught the story that we are a separated self. We are taught that we are individual, that we are in competition, that we are disconnected. We talk about nature as if it's something out there instead of something that we are. We are taught that, in some perversion of the idea of Darwinism, we're told that life is competition, we must all fight. And it's nonsense. All nature, of which we are a part, thrives by the interaction of collaboration and competition.
Yeah.
The interaction of the things that I can do, interconnecting with what others can do, what I receive from others, from the air I breathe, from the food I eat, from the culture that I come from, the history of people who came before me. We all live in a web of connectedness, but we live by the story of disconnection. And so when you say, which is entirely right, when you say people begin to feel that they're not good enough and so on, I see that as a sense of how people think of themselves not being in alignment with the reality of how things are. They think, I am not good enough, whereas the reality is, of course, you're good enough. We're all good enough. We're just not all good at everything, but we're all good enough. Or I am somehow having to compete with this person over there. No, you're not. You don't have to compete with that person over there. Of course, we live in systems that force us to compete, but that's not my fault and it's not your fault. That's the system's fault. And that's why, I'm a great believer in personal development, and I'm a great believer in taking responsibility for our mindset. But I'm not a great believer in saying, if you change your mindset, everything's going to be fine. We got to change the system too.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. When I listen to motivational speakers, and there are some amazing people out there who try to help others to change the story about themselves. And what I see is that, yes, that's great, except that's just another story. And the other story is happening in a system, just treating the symptom other than treating the root cause.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned at the beginning that my background is in theatre. I'm still an actor sometimes, but my particular focus has always been on live theatre or live dance or live improvisation or circus or whatever. Training performers, particularly training performers to be in ensemble. So it's about performing in connectedness. I don't really do that anymore. The Duende School you mentioned closed down a few years ago and so on. But that's been the heart of my work for a long time.
It's still,
Now,
I'm super interested in it because
yeah.
it's based on this interconnectedness. So you are working with this idea of connectedness. So can you just a little bit talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So connectedness is both an internal and an external thing. We have to pay attention to interconnection internally and externally. Internal interconnection in my work starts from the awareness of the complete integration of body and mind. The Western nonsense about somehow the mind and the body being separate things is just that. It's absolute nonsense. We all know it's nonsense. We can look at the history and go, it goes back to Descartes, but then we can state Descartes was going back to the early Christians, and the early Christians were drawing from Aristotle. And, it goes right back all the way, the sense of somehow we are split in two. We're not split in two. We're not. The mind is intimately interrelational with every aspect of the human body. The mind is interrelational with the brain. The mind is interrelationship with the intestine, with the heart, with how much you've slept, with the food you've eaten. So the starting point for training performers is to enable them to work from an integrated body-mind. Not thinking about things and doing them or whatever. The thinking and the doing become one. And that's, of course, intimately based on presence, moving towards having a quiet mind and being absolutely present. Now, there's many other forms of internal integration that we need to develop for performers, but that's the core of it. You are a single, unified organism, and that's what we work with. But then there's the external connectedness. Because, put it at its most simple, I don't care how good you are at acting. If you can't communicate with an audience or another actor, you're useless. You might be feeling so much. I don't care. I don't care what you're feeling. If you can't communicate, if you cannot connect with another actor, with an audience, if you can't spontaneously adapt your performance as the performance around you unfolds, you're useless as a performer. Performance is about communication. It's also about internal integrity and really living in the moment, and all those internal disciplines, they're great, but without the ability to connect, it's nothing. If you're on stage with 3 people, you must, if you're going to make something that's worth an audience watching, you must be connected with the other 2 people. It's not about you showing off. It's not about you going, oh, I'll just do my thing. I don't care what the others do. You're all in it together. It's connection. That's the heart of ensemble, connection.
Yeah.
So the origin of my work, Self with Others, is understanding that to train someone to be a brilliant performer, and by brilliant, I mean someone who the light pours out of them. They are like a bright light that you can't take your eyes off. To be brilliant requires that at the same time we are training the inside and we are training the outside.
So
you can't separate them.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is you are training people to be instead of doing, like being instead of doing. The beingness needs to be there in order to do something brilliantly.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it in the binary of being instead of doing. I would put it in this thing of being as the foundation of doing.
Yeah. So the being
by being, we can truly do. Yeah. We can. I mean, the people think that acting is pretending. No, acting is doing real things, saying real words, making real gestures, picking up real props, looking at people really in the eye. Acting is dead real. It's just also pretending. So when you're acting, you need to be doing real things. however weird or imaginary they are. Abstract dance is real things. It is that leg moving at that angle, at that speed, in that direction. You know, it's precise, real stuff.
It is
Being is the foundation that it grows from. It's not the alternative. It's the foundation that we build on.
yeah, exactly.
So,
And actually, that's what I meant. That
yeah,
at the
no,
beginning,
but it's
yeah,
really interesting, and the reason I picked up on it is because the language we use also reveals the story that we are actively or implicitly believing. Now that I work more as a coach or a mentor, one of the major things that I've taught myself is just listen to what somebody says. But when I say listen, I don't mean listen with the ears only. I mean listen with the eyes. Listen to the pauses. Listen to the moment where someone's eyes go, "Hmm." Because that's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at actors. Are you being here, or has your brain disappeared into somewhere else? So although this comes from acting, the understandings that trained performers have are life skills, deep level life skills, how to be, how to connect, how to inhabit our role authentically, how to empower others to inhabit their role authentically, so that together we can create something bigger than either of us can create separately, and so on. These are life skills. These aren't acting skills, they're life skills.
what I would love to know is how you bring people back into themselves, how you help others finding their beingness, which is always there, but sometimes it's invisible for many people.
I'm not so interested in talking about theatre, because it's not
Okay.
really what I'm doing now. Only in as much as it's really interesting to talk about that as where this has come from. It may be interesting to talk about training presence as the ground of being rather than doing.
Perfect.
So training actors, presence was always the foundation from which everything else grew. The whole thing that started my interest in a lot of this work was, why are some actors and dancers and whatever, musicians, you can't take your eye off them, and others you forget they exist? What is that magical quality? And 30 years work on this, so I can answer that question. That magical quality is well, it's either presence or an enhanced form of presence called charisma, which is basically presence plus joy. So presence was always central to my thinking. We talked a few minutes ago about being and doing. Presence is for me, the foundation of being, from which doing then emerges, but it's the foundation. And again, people think of presence as something terribly complicated and maybe a bit mystical. It isn't. Just as we talked about connection as a natural state, presence is a natural state. And you see it. If there was a loud noise now, you would be very present.
Yeah.
If suddenly there was a smell of gas in the room, you would go, hold on, I have to pause this broadcast a minute. And you would be very present. Presence is our natural state. But we spend an awful lot of time getting distracted. Now, my definition of presence, my most simple definition of presence is not being distracted. And that definition is kind of useful because it points out that presence is about doing less. We don't have to do something to become present. We have to do less. Presence becoming kind of mindfully aware of everything that is happening within and without you, inside and outside. Presence requires you to stop thinking about other things, stop worrying, stop holding tensions in your body, stop wondering if you're good enough, stop going, why am I doing this? It's all to do with stopping. And when you stop all the useless stuff, you discover, hey, I'm present.
And in the present, we receive information. We get access to information that it's there. But when we are distracted and we are away, we don't have access to everything that is happening. Like so many times we don't have access to our gut feeling because we are busy thinking about, oh my God, what shall I do? When the answer is right here. It's right there.
Always. And it's nothing mystical about the body talking. It's the fact that the entire body is integrated with the thinking process. And also the unconscious reveals itself through the body. By observing and listening to the body, we can observe and listen to the workings of the unconscious mind.
Yeah.
You're so right. The information is there. Now, see, I'm not a religious person, but there's a phrase from the Bible that really speaks to me. And I think it's something to do with it might even be from a hymn rather than the Bible, I don't know. But it's something to do with the burning bush, where you listen and from out of the burning bush there comes the still small voice. That's the information that is waiting for us to hear it. Feeling lost in life, looking for your purpose? Spend time quietening the worries until you can hear the still small voice. Uncomfortable about something going on in a relationship you're not sure about? Do less until you can hear the still small voice, because it's a very gentle, loving voice just waiting for you to shut up long enough so that you can hear it.
Yeah, that's what I do in my work with my clients, that there are so many voices that people get overwhelmed and they have no idea which voice to listen to. So that's where fear comes in. Yeah. And decisions are based on fear when if they just got quiet, that quiet voice would speak up. I think it's a body felt knowing. So it's not a knowing in the brain. It's a body felt knowing that that's my truth.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Again, partly because of my background in performance, I would say you're never going to know if that's the deepest voice. But you can go, well, I've listened and I'm going to make my best guess. This is what I think I need to do. If, as I start to do things and I move on, I begin to discover that this is not taking me in the right direction, I will continue to listen and listen for another voice. I mean, a performer never knows the right choice. What's the right way to play Hamlet? What's the right way to do it? It's a ridiculous question.
Well, but then there's a next present moment. So yes, maybe I hear the voice now, and yes, maybe 5 minutes later, something else is true. So yeah. That's how to be present all the time and not acting out what was true 2 days ago.
Totally. And again, I would suggest that we look for patterns. One of the training mechanisms that I used to work with at the Duende School would be, people do a lot of solo improvisations. And at the end of each one, they would always say what they liked about their improvisation. And sometimes they'd go, I really love being wild. And then the next day they'd go, I really love being quiet. And if they believe what they're saying too much, they can get very confused. But if at the end of 2 weeks you go, it's interesting because you've done about 20 improvisations and, you did one where you like being quiet, but generally you're enjoying being wild. I'm not saying that's the absolute truth, but it is a pattern. If you're, feeling uncomfortable at the thought of having to go to work, because you are in a toxic work environment.
Yeah.
And you feel terrible on Monday, and you feel dread and anxiety on Tuesday. But then on Wednesday, you wake up and go, cool. It doesn't mean that there isn't a toxic environment. It just means that that day things were okay. But when you look at the whole week, the pattern will tell you. That's why I say you never know, but you can take your best guess.
That gives a bit of spaciousness into this whole idea of personality. Like we are so married to our ideas of who we are. I am this, I am that. And I think that when we label ourselves, it's almost equals to death, because then there's no movement anymore. We are in the present moment, and there is a truth in the present moment, and then yeah, maybe there is a pattern. Maybe there's a pattern, and we can have some kind of conclusion, but we don't even have to. We don't even have to have big conclusions.
Absolutely. Yeah, you say it so well. We can reach a conclusion, but a conclusion means an ending. How can you reach a conclusion when it isn't ended? I can't reach conclusions about myself. I'm not over yet. Things will change. Things grow. I learn things from you. That changes me. I read a book tonight. That changes me. All I can do is continue to observe the patterns and how the patterns change over time, and not get too wedded to some definition of myself, which might be a definition I picked up 50 years ago. And maybe it's time I moved beyond it. As somebody, I mean, for example, and this moves into a slightly more personal realm, but, I was somebody who did not have a happy schooling. I was sent away to a boarding school, and I was bullied, quite consistently while I was there. I learned to have very strong attitudes towards myself, not very healthy ones. Certain amount of self-loathing, feeling like an imposter, thinking everybody hated me all the time. We can get very wedded to our attitudes, but it would be a shame if I was still here, fiercely defending my right to hate myself just because of stuff that happened 45 years ago. Personal development, the clue is in the word. It's about development, about letting go of conclusions and accepting and celebrating our right to continue to evolve as we age.
And that's the trap with trauma, that we keep repeating a story of who we are, when in fact that's not who we are. That's something that happened to you, happened to me, and you developed in that time defense mechanisms, and which you don't need anymore. You don't need that story anymore. But from that story, so many beautiful things grew out. You are here today because of the learnings that happened when you were younger, and through your challenges.
I think it's one of the harder parts of moving beyond the difficult things in life is, moving beyond them is hard as it is, but one of the harder things after that is learning to be grateful to the parts of you that you're trying to move beyond. So, my insecurity and anxiety, which, have done me significant damage as an adult. It's very easy for me to go, I hate being insecure, I hate being anxious. But when I say that, I'm hating myself. I'm hating a part of me. One of the hardest parts of growth is going, okay, I no longer need to be anxious, but I'm really grateful that I was anxious because it made me vigilant, and that vigilance protected me. And thank you. And internal family systems therapy, of course, maps on to some of this thinking. to learn to be grateful to those parts of yourself that you want to leave behind because they were mechanisms and behaviors that you put in place in order to survive, and they damn well worked because you survived.
Yes. In fact, I would even go further, because when we go through trauma and we cope with those difficulties, we also get access to something in us that we wouldn't have gotten access to if we hadn't had those challenges.
It's a complicated one because there are things that have happened in my life that, on balance, I really wish hadn't happened. I can't look back and go, I'm really glad that happened because I learned stuff from it. No, I'm not glad it happened. I had a heart attack 5 years ago. I'm not glad I had a heart attack 5 years ago. However I spin it, I would be lying if I said, I'm really glad that I now have a damaged heart and probably a lessened life expectancy. And I still sometimes get some pain. Well, I get pain sometimes when I walk up a hill. Yeah, I'm not glad about that. I can be grateful for some of the mental changes that the heart attack provoked.
Yes.
I don't, I find it difficult to buy into, I'm sure this isn't what you're saying, but to buy into what I think of as a false positivity by saying everything that happened was amazing, because it isn't. Stuff happens which is not amazing. Stuff happens which should never happen. Stuff happens which is tragic and painful, and stuff happens that people never recover from. There is, even in that, the possibility of searching for the elements of things that have happened that you can be grateful for. This maps onto a lot of my teaching, and my teaching is, of performers, and now my coaching and mentoring is based on searching for and identifying pleasure. It doesn't mean you have to like what you're doing, and it doesn't mean you have to like what's happened to you in the past. It doesn't mean you have to like the job you do. What it means is you have to search for, not have to, but I encourage you to search for what you like about what has to be done. Why does that matter? Because it means instead of feeling sorry for yourself and feeling like a victim, you start going, no, this is what I like about this, and this is what I'm going to focus on. I think about my heart attack. I could focus on the fact it's probably shortened my life expectancy. If I could focus on those things, or I could focus on the psychological and emotional reset that it set in train, I wouldn't be living where I am now, in a very remote place, in a very beautiful place, had I not had a heart attack 5 years ago. So I can focus on those things, even while saying I would rather they hadn't happened in some ways.
I wasn't suggesting this approach that, let's be positive. Like I'm definitely not this person, because again, that's a story. That's a story that we are trying to tell ourselves, but it's not necessarily the truth. What I was referring to is exactly what you shared, that there is something that you are not happy about, but it opened up some kind of new opportunity in your life. You made changes, and now you are exploring a different version of John. And you had been a world traveler. You lived in so many places, and now you are living in this remote area and a more quiet life, and that's a different experience of this whole thing, who you are. So since we don't have a lot of time, how about maybe we focus on your work that you do now?
It's very interesting. I I still do a little bit of training teachers. I'm actually just about to run some workshops, training artists who run workshops. I'm training teachers and I train coaches sometimes, as well as doing coaching and mentoring. And the work on presence kind of has two parallel functions. First, for myself, I need to do that work for me, on me, to myself, because the single most important offer I can make to anyone, whether it's a big group of people or a one-to-one session, is to give absolute, or at least the best that I can, focus and attention to being present with the person. So, very simple. If I'm not present, I will not see the details and hear my own sort of insights about what's happening in a conversation. So a key part of the presence work is actually personal work for me. Continually, every day I do work just to remind myself to be present. Within a meeting, a conversation like this, there'll just be little moments where I'm now deeply in the habit of reminding myself to be present. As I pick up a cup, I take a little drink. I actually taste it. It's cinnamon bark with lemon juice in hot water, if you're interested. But it's those things that remind me to live in this moment of conversation or interaction that I'm having. So that's one side of the presence work. And the other side of the presence work is encouraging the other person to discover how to be present and so on, as a way, or to rediscover how to be present, as a way, as a mechanism, as a tool for breaking their headlong rush towards judgment, towards enacting habitual patterns and so on. And often that will take the form of, in a session, I'll just almost in the middle of a sentence, I'll just go, that thing that you're saying now, where does it live in your body? What part of your body is responding? People go, oh, I never thought of that. Of course, because we don't think of that. And then I go, oh, yeah, there's a tension in my shoulders. And I go, okay, what happens if you just breathe into your shoulders for a minute? None of this is high level stuff. This isn't sophisticated. This is very basic embodiment. Just what's happening in your body now. So giving people the tools. I work with 8 principles of presence, and I work with sensual engagement to encourage people to be present. So I've got technical mechanisms that people can use to become more present. Giving people the tools to be present is giving them the tools to break habitual reactiveness and create space to hear that still small voice. So there's actually a third level to presence, which is when I'm training coaches and training teachers, helping them understand how they can then give the tools to their clients. So that's actually training people to train people to be present, if you see what I mean. So there's work on the self. I must be present. I want to encourage, if you were my coaching client, I would want to encourage you continually to return to presence, particularly if you are going into difficult places, because I think it's Eckhart Tolle who says that in the present moment, we don't have any problems. And when people are going into difficult places, it's sometimes useful to say, right now, release that tension in your face. Oh, yeah, that's better. And then the third thing is actually sharing and training people, sharing the tools and techniques, training people in the 8 principles of presence, in sensual engagement and so on and so forth. So it is absolutely foundational in everything I do. Training community activists to run decent communities, train them to be present with each other. Teachers, managers, you want to be a decent manager? Learn to shut up and be present with what is actually happening in the room instead of strutting around like you've got all the answers. Entrepreneurs, become present with what really matters to you. Some of my coaching clients are religious people, which is funny because I'm not a religious person. Get so caught up in the institutions that they work for and say, no, come back to what really matters now, not the idea of what matters now. This is the biggest thing we can do, is continually enable each other to become present.
Yeah. What are the 8 principles that you mentioned?
I can never remember them. I have them written on a piece of paper. Okay, the 8 principles are, I work with the idea of presence, as I've already mentioned, as not being distracted. Presence is eradication of distraction. And there are basically 2 things that we work on to become present. One is quietening the mind, to quieten mental distraction, and the other is opening the senses, including the proprioceptive sense, internal awareness, or interoception, the internal awareness, so that we can actually connect with what is unfolding in this moment in our particular part of the universe. The 8 principles of presence are healthy, useful ways to use your mind, which will move you away from distraction and overload towards focus and calm. There's things like have no opinion. Mm-hmm. There's a time for opinions, but if you're having a conversation with someone and you are having an opinion about what they're saying, you're not having the conversation. You're not engaging with someone. You're busy thinking about what you think about what they're saying.
You're closed off from the other person because you're already forming your opinion. You're focusing on yourself, your mental constructs.
Absolutely. So a principle like have no opinion encourages you, when you begin to go, yeah, but what about this and that, to go, stop it. Open, quieten the mind, listen. Another principle, know your hierarchy of tasks. We're so busy getting distracted, going, oh, I've got to do this and that, and you spend all day doing something completely useless and find you haven't done something useful. Know your hierarchy of tasks. Know that there's some things that need to be done, do them. Some things that could be done, do them if you have time. Some things that you shouldn't do, don't do them. In other words, make really clear choices about what requires your attention and what does not require your attention. Get rid of all this muddle of, oh, yeah, but. No. If it's got to be done, do it. If it could be done, only do it if you've got time, because you've done the things that have to be done. So these are the principles. They are ways of guiding your thinking towards focus and calm.
I find that such a powerful exercise, and I work with old folk stories as well. And there is the original version of Cinderella where she wants to go to the ball or whatever, but the wicked stepmother pours all kind of seeds in front of her, and she says that, well, if you separate the different seeds from each other, that's when you can, then you can go to the ball. And she's sitting there and she has like all this tiny different seeds, and she starts separating them, and from a symbolic approach, it symbolizes that sometimes in life, well, probably every day, we gotta sit down and separate the important stuff from the less important things. We need to know what our priorities are instead of getting lost in that big pile of seeds.
It's very hard to be present if we are not calm. And it's very hard to be calm if we are feeling overwhelmed. So just to take a moment, and I'm not talking about a to-do list. It's not about that, because what's important changes according to what's happening around you. That's why it's to do with presence. You know, if you go, well, the most important thing is to do this and then do that, and then, you know, your son or your daughter phones up and say, I've been just feeling really sick, I'm in the hospital. That doesn't matter anymore. The external circumstances change your hierarchy of tasks. So a present person goes, oh, okay, hierarchy of tasks changed. I do that. And that happens on the small scale. Email comes in. No, I'm not dealing with that. It's not important. Or I am dealing with that. That is important. It's not getting overwhelmed. It's just being able to go yes or no. Yes. Yeah, I'll do that. No, won't do that. I'll do that later if I have time. If I don't, it's just not going to get done. Not going to stress about it. It won't get done. That particular wormhole, which is calling me, I'm not going down. I'm just not doing it because I know if I spend all day looking up something on Facebook and getting lost, I'm going to feel terrible by the end of the day and super stressed and all that. Just clarity, mental clarity.
Yeah, it's a little bit like what Viktor Frankl says, that how to respond instead of reacting all the time, that there's a space, there needs to be a space, and that space between what comes at you and what you will do, there's a space where you can just check in what's happening and make a decision based on what's true in the present for you instead of just reacting all the time. What do you like to, because we only have a few minutes, what would you like to share about your work that you want others to hear? Maybe that would be the most important question now.
It's always hard, isn't it? Because the temptation is to try to sell something. I don't want to sell anything. I mean, I do. I'd love to sell more things, but that's not what I'm really interested in. You see, the belief structure that I work from, which is based on 30 years of working very, very deep level with performers, and performers are just, we're humans. Yeah. The belief structure is that each of us has phenomenal capacity which we block ourselves from realizing. But that capacity, we often think it's about being able to succeed against others, be more successful than others, win some kind of competition. That thinking is actually the cause of our unhappiness and dissatisfaction. The world is we're in a mess. I mean, I'm heading on for 60, not quite there yet. It probably won't affect me, but the world is in a mess and it's getting messier. Unless we change the very stories that we work from, we are not going to survive. I mean, some humans will survive. I don't think the human race will be wiped out, but anything resembling civilization is not going to survive. Now, that's a pretty scary thing, and it leaves a lot of people with a lot of stress. The systems that we live in are breaking our mental health, all of those things. The good thing is that every single one of us, has the power to be part of the process of change, not against each other, with each other. And if you don't want to do it with each other because you struggle with other people, which I quite understand, with trees, with animals, grow a forest, care for the birds in your garden, eat food that has not been bought by destroying the landscape. Whatever it is you need to be and do, you have that power. My work, Self with Others, is about trying to give people frameworks to be able to make those choices to live a more sustainable, better life, ecologically, psychologically, economically, all of those things. There's no quick fixes for where we're at, but every single one of us, however much we may be struggling, and I have been in the darkest places of struggle. However hard we're struggling, the possibility for transformation is here in our body minds right now, this moment. The possibility for change is just waiting for you to be humble and generous and quiet enough to listen to it. I love people coming to me to work with me. I love training people and mentoring people. You know what I love more than anything? I love people coming to work with me and after some time going, I don't need you anymore because the work that I need to do is in me.
Yeah, what you said really, really resonated with me, especially that the book I'm writing, that's the main theme, how the stories we make are about to destroy us as human beings. And the mess that is inside is the mess that we see outside. Mm-hmm. And being present and taking full responsibility for what I feel and what I do now, that's I can generate change. If I generate change, if I'm fully present, if my interaction with you will be different, and then the interaction in my family or my friends, and that's something we can do to change what's out there. Instead of just sitting and saying, oh, that war is horrible. Well, that war is between stories, and the inner conflict is between stories, and my conflict with the other person is the conflict between stories. So John, thank you so much for this conversation. I could continue, but I'll let you go.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a real joy talking with you.
Thank you, John.